A German train engineer shoveled coal into his locomotive's firebox, just like he'd done 1,000 times before. But this time, one piece of coal was different. Minutes later, the entire locomotive exploded. This is the story of Britain's most devious sabotage weapon, fake coal that destroyed the enemy from within. During World War II, Britain's Special Operations Executive, the SOE, created some of the most ingenious sabotage devices in history, exploding rats, disguised bombs, and perhaps their most clever invention, explosive coal. These weren't real lumps of coal. They were hollowed-out metal shells, painted black, filled with plastic explosives, and designed to look exactly like ordinary coal. British agents would sneak them into German coal depots, railway yards, or factory stockpiles. Then they'd wait. When an unsuspecting worker shoveled the fake coal into a furnace, boiler, or locomotive firebox, the heat would detonate the explosive. The result? Catastrophic destruction from the inside out. The Germans never saw it coming. By 1941, Britain was losing the war in Europe. France had fallen. German forces controlled most of the continent. Britain stood alone, battered by bombing raids and facing possible invasion. The British military couldn't match Germany's industrial might or military power head-on, so they turned to sabotage. The Special Operations Executive was created in July 1940 with a simple mission: set Europe ablaze. Their job was to conduct covert operations behind enemy lines, sabotaging factories, disrupting supply lines, assassinating key officials, and supporting resistance movements. But sending agents into Nazi-occupied territory was incredibly dangerous. Many were captured and executed, and even successful sabotage operations, blowing up bridges, derailing trains, were loud, obvious, and immediately investigated. The Germans would hunt down the saboteurs and execute anyone suspected of helping them. Britain needed something different, something subtle, something that would cause maximum damage while being almost impossible to trace, something the enemy would never suspect until it was too late. That's where explosive coal came in. The explosive coal was a masterpiece of deceptive engineering. Here's how it was made. Step 1. The mold. SOE technicians started with real coal. They studied different types: anthracite, bituminous, Welsh coal, German coal, learning the exact colors, textures, and shapes. Then they created molds from actual coal lumps, capturing every detail. Step 2. The shell. Using the molds, they cast hollow metal shells, usually steel or iron, shaped exactly like coal. These shells were thin enough to heat quickly, but strong enough to contain the explosive. Step 3. The explosive. Inside each shell, they packed plastic explosive, usually a type called Noble 808, which was stable, powerful, and wouldn't detonate from rough handling. The amount varied, but typically each fake coal lump contained enough explosive to destroy a locomotive boiler or factory furnace. Step 4. The disguise. This is where it gets brilliant. The metal shells were painted with special coal-colored paint that included real coal dust. This gave them the exact texture and appearance of real coal. Some were even coated with coal tar to make them smell right. The finished product was nearly impossible to distinguish from real coal, especially in dim light, covered in coal dust, or when a worker was shoveling quickly. Step 5. The delivery. British agents operating behind enemy lines would infiltrate German coal depots, railway yards, or factory stockpiles. They'd plant a few pieces of fake coal deep in a pile, not too many, just enough to cause damage without raising immediate suspicion. Then came the waiting game. Step 6. The detonation. When a German worker shoveled coal into a furnace or locomotive firebox, they'd eventually grab a piece of fake coal. Into the fire it went. As the metal shell heated, the explosive inside reached its detonation temperature, usually around 300 to 400 degrees Celsius. Boom! The explosion would rupture the boiler, destroy the firebox, shatter the locomotive, or wreck the factory furnace. Steam pressure would magnify the damage, often causing secondary explosions. Workers would be killed or injured. The equipment would be out of commission for weeks or months. And here's the genius part. It looked like an accident. Boiler explosions happened occasionally in wartime. Poor maintenance, defective equipment, operator error. The Germans would investigate, find a ruptured boiler, and often conclude it was just bad luck. They rarely suspected sabotage. And even when they did, how could they find the saboteur? The coal had been shoveled weeks earlier. It could have come from anywhere. There was no way to trace it back to a specific agent or operation. So, how effective was explosive coal? That's where the story gets murky. The truth is, we don't know exactly how much damage it caused. By design, explosive coal left little evidence. Successful detonations looked like accidents. The Germans rarely realized they'd been sabotaged, and British records from the SOE were often incomplete or destroyed after the war. But we do have some evidence. British intelligence reports mention explosive coal being used in France, Belgium, Norway, and Germany itself. Agents reported planting fake coal in railway yards and industrial facilities. Some reports describe successful detonations, locomotives destroyed, factories damaged, German soldiers killed. One report from occupied France describes a locomotive explosion at a rail depot that killed 3 German soldiers and destroyed the engine completely. German investigators concluded it was a boiler defect. British records suggest it was explosive coal. Another report from Belgium mentions a power plant furnace explosion that knocked out electricity to a munitions factory for 6 weeks. The Germans blamed faulty coal quality. The SOE claimed credit. Even more important than the physical damage was the psychological effect. Once the Germans realized explosive coal existed, and they eventually did, they became paranoid. German railway workers were ordered to inspect coal carefully before loading. This slowed operations. Coal supplies were guarded more heavily, diverting manpower. Some German officials became so paranoid they insisted on using only coal from trusted sources, which complicated logistics. The Germans even created training materials showing soldiers and workers what fake coal looked like. But this was difficult. The British fakes were so good that even trained inspectors had trouble spotting them in poor light or when working quickly. Imagine being a German train engineer. Every time you shoveled coal, you'd wonder, is this the one that explodes? That psychological burden, constant fear, constant suspicion, took a toll. Workers became more cautious, which slowed productivity. Some refused to work with coal at all. But explosive coal wasn't a war-winning weapon. It couldn't destroy entire rail networks or bring down factories single-handedly. Each fake coal lump could only destroy one target, and planting them was dangerous. Agents risked capture and execution. Plus, the explosive coal had to be planted in the right place at the right time. If it sat in a coal pile too long, it might be discovered. If it was shoveled into a small fire instead of a high-pressure boiler, the explosion might be too weak to cause serious damage. Still, for a relatively simple device, metal, paint, explosive, it was remarkably effective. It caused real damage, created fear, and cost the Germans time and resources. Once the Germans realized Britain was using explosive coal, they reacted predictably, with paranoia and brutality. German authorities issued orders requiring coal inspections. Workers were trained to look for fake coal, checking weight, examining texture, looking for seams where metal shells had been welded together. But this was easier said than done. In the chaos of wartime, with workers exhausted and working in poor light, inspecting every single piece of coal was almost impossible. Coal piles contained thousands of lumps. Finding one fake piece was like finding a needle in a haystack. The Nazis responded to sabotage with savage reprisals. When they suspected sabotage, whether from explosive coal or other methods, they'd execute suspected resistance members, hostages, or random civilians. This created a moral dilemma for British planners. Yes, explosive coal damaged Germany's infrastructure, but it also triggered brutal Nazi reprisals against innocent people. Was the sabotage worth the civilian deaths it caused? The SOE wrestled with this question throughout the war. Ultimately, they concluded that weakening Germany's war machine justified the risk, but it was never an easy decision. Counter-sabotage measures. The Germans also developed their own explosive coal to use against Allied forces. They attempted to plant fake coal in British coal supplies, though with limited success. Britain's domestic coal industry was tightly controlled, making infiltration difficult. This created a bizarre cat-and-mouse game. British engineers improved their fake coal, making it harder to detect. German inspectors developed better detection methods. The British responded with new designs, and so on. By late 1944, as Allied forces advanced into Europe and Germany's infrastructure crumbled under bombing raids, explosive coal became less relevant. There were easier ways to sabotage Germany's collapsing rail network. Explosive coal was just one of many.
Smash that like button and subscribe for more secrets like this. See you next time.